Somewhere right now, an F-150 owner is sitting in a repair shop parking lot, staring at an estimate for $2,800, mentally preparing to hand over a card for a car part they've never heard of. And in a huge number of cases, that part isn't actually broken. It's dirty and possibly starved. It's been mistreated by a habit so small the owner did it again this morning without noticing. That's it. The repair isn't expensive because the part failed. It's expensive because nobody ever told the owner the 7 ordinary things they're doing to their own truck every single week that quietly turn a free fix into a 4-figure invoice. Here's the trade you're actually making. On one side, 30 seconds of patience or a $5 oil filter or knowing when not to shut the key off. On the other side, $2,000, $3,000, sometimes closer to $8,000, and a truck sitting in the shop for a week. That's the gap this video closes, and if you like videos like these that teach you what you should know, hit the subscribe button. It's free. And almost nobody knows that gap even exists. Most F-150 owners have never heard the words cam phaser, let alone that a cam phaser can wear out, let alone that 4 completely ordinary habits, stacked up over a few years, are exactly what wears it out, and that the only warning you get sounds like a 2-second rattle you'll forget about before you're out of the driveway. So before the list, you need one idea in your head, because it explains every item on it. Think about blood flow to your fingers and toes. When circulation gets compromised, you're cold, you've been sitting too long. Something's restricting flow. You don't feel it in your chest first. You feel it at the very ends of your body, the parts furthest from the pump, the parts that get the last and the least of whatever pressure is left. Your EcoBoost cam phasers are the fingertips of this engine. They sit at the far end of the oil system. They need constant pressure just to hold camshaft timing in place, and they're the first thing that suffers the moment that pressure isn't there. They can't feel patience. They can't feel a good excuse. They can't tell the difference between a 15-year-old truck and a 3-year-old truck that just gets driven badly. They only know pressure, or the absence of it, and when they don't get it, they don't fail quietly. They rattle. That rattle, the one almost every EcoBoost owner has heard and shrugged off, is this engine's entire nervous system, screaming through the one channel it has, that oil isn't reaching a moving part fast enough. Keep that idea in your head, pressure, in the right place, at the right moment, because every habit on this list breaks that rule in a different way. Here's what we're covering. 4 habits that starve or contaminate that oil supply before it ever reaches the phasers. One that looks like it's got nothing to do with oil at all, until you see how it sneaks past every filter you own. And 2 that aren't really habits behind the wheel at all. They're habits of ignoring what the truck is already telling you. Along the way, there are 2 repairs on this list you should never, ever attempt yourself. And toward the end, I'll explain exactly why. Because getting one of those wrong doesn't just cost you a repair bill, it costs you the engine. Let's start with the big one, the habit responsible for more unnecessary phaser and timing chain repairs than everything else on this list combined, mostly because almost every F-150 owner does it, multiple times a day, without ever realizing it's a habit at all. Every time you park this truck and let the engine go fully cold, sitting overnight, sitting all day at work, sitting an hour while you run into 3 stores on a Saturday, the oil drains out of the top of the engine and pools back down in the pan. When you restart, there's a window, just a few seconds, where the cam phasers and the timing chain tensioners are running on almost no oil pressure at all, because the pump hasn't built it back up yet. Here's the sneaky part almost nobody realizes. It's not the occasional cold start that does the damage. It's stacking dozens of them close together in short trips. The school run, the coffee run, the 5-minute drive to drop something off. Because every one of those trips ends before the engine and the oil ever really reaches operating temperature. You're not doing 1 cold start a day. You're doing 4 or 5. And each one asks those phasers to hold camshaft timing on borrowed pressure. You'll know it from the driver's seat. You start the truck in the morning, and there's a 2, maybe 3-second tapping, ticking rattle from the top front of the engine, gone almost as fast as it started. Most owners describe it as sounding like a diesel for a second, or a marble rattling around in a tin can. It happens, you shrug, you back out of the driveway, and by the end of the block it's silent again. so it feels like nothing. It isn't nothing. Ford's own Technical Service Bulletin, TSB 23-21324, which supersedes two earlier ones, confirms that a rattle like this, especially after the truck sat 6 hours or more, points directly at worn variable camshaft timing units. The phasers, the fix, once they're actually worn, is a phaser and timing chain replacement. Pull the front cover, replace all 4 phasers, the chains, the guides, and usually the oil pump while it's apart, because it's already off. That's a real job, 10 to 12 hours of labor on top of parts. And here's the part people get wrong, and it's expensive. They hear the rattle, it disappears in 3 seconds, and they decide that means it's fine. It's not fine. It's a warning that resets to 0 every single morning and gets a little worse each time. Ignore it for a year or 2 of short trip driving, and you're not looking at a free warm-up habit anymore. You're looking at that same $2,800 to $3,500 phaser job. Except now the chain's developed slack, too, which raises the odds you walk away with a mistimed engine instead of just a noisy one. A Ford technician quoted in that same bulletin process put it plainly. A rattle that only lasts a few seconds isn't hazardous to keep driving on in the short term, but it means the phasers are already worn, and every cold start after that is just more mileage on a part that's already failing. Ford took this seriously enough to run a free field service action, Program 21B10, to update the software calibration and quiet the noise, and a separate extended warranty program, 21N03, to cover phaser replacement on affected trucks. Now, being honest, warming the truck up doesn't undo phaser wear that's already happened, and it won't make a 5-second rattle vanish overnight. What it does is stop the wear from compounding. Idle for 30 seconds before you back out, and where you can, change shorted errands into 1 longer trip instead of 4 cold ones. It costs you nothing but a little patience, and it's the single biggest lever on this entire list. Number 2, and this is the habit that turns every other item on this list from unlikely into inevitable. Your EcoBoost calls for a specific oil, meeting a Ford spec called WSSM2Cs 961A1, which basically certifies it as API SP rated oil built to hold up under high heat and turbo pressure. Ford's manual says 7,500 to 10,000 miles under normal use, but normal use has a narrower definition than most owners think. The sneaky cause here is the oil life monitor itself. It's calibrated for ideal driving, long highway trips, mild climates. The moment you're doing stop-and-go city driving, towing, or a lot of those short cold start trips from item 1, Ford's own severe use guidance drops that interval down to somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 miles. Most owners never see that distinction. They wait for the dash to tell them. And the dash is answering a question about a different truck than the one they actually drive. You won't feel this one coming the way you feel a rattle. It shows up as oil gone dark and gritty on the dipstick, a check engine light for cam-crank correlation, or, the one that should stop you cold, an oil pressure warning light. It can also show up as fuel economy quietly sliding, or a faint ticking that used to only happen cold now lingering after the engine's warm. The fix is almost insultingly simple. Change the oil and filter on the severe use schedule. 5,000 to 7,000 miles, not the eco-friendly one on the dash. Use the correct 5W30 synthetic spec, a quality filter, and don't let the level drop between changes. Here's where people get it wrong and pay for it twice. They stretch an interval because the monitor still shows green, or they grab whatever conventional oil is cheapest, and that thin, degraded oil is exactly what starves the phasers from item 1, and separately starves the turbo bearings we're about to get to. You're not saving $40 on an oil change. You're spending it against a bill 50 times bigger. This is close to a consensus among the mechanics who actually pull these engines apart. One line that keeps showing up from Ford service techs: something close to 99% of the phaser failures they see trace back to oil that was overdue or the wrong grade. Not a manufacturing defect, a maintenance gap. To be fair, catching up on a badly neglected oil habit doesn't reverse existing wear inside the phasers or the chain guides. If you've already got a rattle, a fresh oil change alone solves it roughly never. It's a management tool, not a repair. But it's the cheapest insurance on this whole list against every other item making things worse faster. Number 3, and this one's closely tied to number 1, but it's about what you do with your foot, not just the keys. Even after that quick cold start, the oil inside a cold engine is thick, and it takes real driving, not idling, for it to fully circulate and for the turbos to get proper lubrication. Stomping on the throttle in that window, racing away from a stoplight, hauling onto the highway at full boost before things have warmed up, forces the turbo to spin its speed on oil that hasn't finished doing its job. This is the habit that makes item 1 worse in real time. That 2-second rattle can stretch longer, or you might catch a faint metallic clatter as cold pistons and lifters take a sudden hard hit. Occasionally, a turbo lets out a brief whistle or howl as boost spikes faster than the oil film underneath it can keep up with. The fix costs you nothing but about 30 seconds and a little restraint. Let the engine idle briefly, then drive gently for the first minute or two, easing into throttle rather than mashing it, until you're past that first mark on the temperature gauge. Skip that 30 seconds regularly, especially in cold weather, and you're stacking damage on 2 fronts at once, accelerating the same phaser wear from item 1, and separately wearing the turbo's oil film, which is a different, faster kind of failure we're about to cover. Garrett, the company that actually manufactures these turbos, flags hard acceleration from cold as one of the most common turbo killers they see, specifically because oil has to circulate before the shaft is ready to spin under load. This one won't show up as its own line item on a shop invoice. It's a multiplier, not a standalone cause. But multiplied across a few winters of impatient mornings, it's a real chunk of why some trucks need the item 1 repair at 80,000 miles, and others don't need it at 200,000. Number 4, and this is where things get more delicate, because it's also one of the 2 repairs on this list you should never attempt yourself, which I promised you earlier. After you've been towing, hauling up a long grade, or just driving hard on the highway for a while, the turbos and the exhaust around them are sitting at extreme temperatures. Shut the engine off the instant you park, and oil flow stops immediately, but the turbo is still radiating that heat into whatever oil is left sitting inside it. That trapped superheated oil cooks. It turns into a hard carbon deposit inside the turbo's bearings. The industry calls it coking, and Garrett's own engineers describe hot shutdown in almost exactly these words, as something that can cause carbon buildup in the turbo leading to bearing failure. The tell is usually a few minutes after you've already walked away, a thread of smoke from the tailpipe as oil residue burns off. On your next start, you might hear a new turbo whine, a screech, or notice boost feels softer than it did the day before. There are 2 camps on how to prevent this. Some owners swear by aftermarket turbo timers, devices that keep the engine idling automatically for a minute or 2 after you pull the key, cooling the turbo down before shutdown. Other mechanics will tell you a timer solves a problem you can solve for free. Just sit in the driveway for 30 to 60 seconds at idle before you shut off, especially after towing, and you get the same result without wiring another electronic device into a truck that already has plenty. Both camps are right. Pick whichever one you'll actually do every single time, because the one that doesn't happen is the one that costs you. Here's the part that makes this the highest urgency item on the whole list. This isn't slow cumulative wear like items 1 through 3. Oil coking can seize a turbo shaft in minutes, not months, turning 30 seconds of impatience into a turbocharger replacement in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, on the spot. And this is the one I want to flag as never die. If a turbo fails this way, the temptation is to buy a cheap aftermarket unit online and swap it in the driveway. Don't. Garrett's own data puts north of 90% of turbo failures down to oil problems, starvation or contamination, which means a fresh turbo bolted onto the same bad oil habit just fails again, usually faster. This is a job for a shop that will also flush the oil feed line and diagnose why the first one failed. Number 5, and I want to be upfront. This one breaks the pattern a little. Everything so far has been about oil pressure reaching a part on time. This one's about what your engine breathes, not what it drinks. I'm including it anyway, because a filthy intake doesn't just cost you power. It eventually poisons the same oil we've spent this whole video protecting. And it's not just a money problem either. A severely clogged air filter forces the turbo to work harder pulling in the air it needs, running it hotter and under more strain than it should be. On the flip side, a neglected or clogged PCV valve, the small part that manages crankcase pressure, lets that pressure build until it starts pushing oil past seals and into the intake itself, the part almost nobody connects. Oil pulled into the intake this way doesn't just burn off harmlessly. It coats the compressor wheel, the intercooler, and the throttle body in a fine oily film, exactly where you don't want lubrication trying to double as intake air. You'll notice it as a flat, sluggish feeling under acceleration, delayed turbo response, maybe a faint oily smell, or actual visible residue if you ever look down into the intake pipe. And a turbo that hesitates to spool isn't only annoying. Merging onto a highway in a truck that suddenly doesn't have the power you're expecting is a safety problem, not just an inconvenience. The fix here is the cheapest thing in this entire video. Replace the air filter roughly every 30,000 miles under normal driving, or a lot sooner, every 10 to 15,000, if you're regularly on dusty or unpaved roads. A quality filter runs about $20 to $50. If money's tight this month, this is the one item on the list you can absolutely still afford. It's cheaper than a tank of gas. Skip it for years, and you're not looking at a $20 part anymore. You're looking at cleaning or replacing a turbo compressor wheel coated in oily residue, which puts you right back in that $1,500 to $2,000 range from item 4. To be fair, a dirty filter alone rarely kills a turbo outright. It's a slow contributor, not a single dramatic event like hot shutdown, but it's also the cheapest insurance policy in this whole video, which is exactly why it's worth the 30 seconds it takes to check. Number 6 and 7. And I'm grouping these together, because they're not really about anything you do behind the wheel. They're both about ignoring what the truck is already trying to tell you. 6 is cooling system neglect. This engine relies on its cooling system to keep everything, including the oil itself, from cooking under heat. Let coolant go years past its interval, run a weak thermostat, or keep driving through a temperature warning, and you risk warping a cylinder head or blowing a head gasket outright. The warning signs are a temperature gauge creeping up, white smoke from the exhaust, or coolant disappearing with no visible leak, which usually means it's going somewhere inside the engine it shouldn't. Ford calls for a coolant flush at an initial 10 years or 200,000 kilometers, then every 5 years or 100,000 miles after that. The fix is exactly that simple. Keep the schedule, replace an aging thermostat and hoses before they fail, not after. Get this wrong and you're not talking thousands anymore. A genuinely warped head or blown gasket can run $4,000 to $8,000, sometimes a full engine replacement, which is the single most expensive outcome on this entire list. 7 is ignoring the service bulletins and the small symptoms. Ford has issued real specific fixes for this engine, the phaser rattle bulletin we already covered, and a separate one, TSB 2024-23, addressing excessive oil consumption on certain high-output 3.5-liter EcoBoosts. If your truck's oil is disappearing faster than it should, and you just keep topping it off without asking why, you're quietly running that phaser and turbo system on marginal oil pressure without ever knowing it. The fix costs you nothing but a phone call. Next time you're at the dealer for anything, ask them to check for open TSBs and recalls against your VIN. A lot of it is free. Both of these share the same story. The truck isn't hiding anything from you. It's telling you, in a gauge, a dipstick, a bulletin already sitting in Ford's own system. And the only habit that actually hurts you here is not asking. So, let's bring this together, because there's really one thread running through all 7 of these. None of these habits breaks apart on its own, not directly. What every single one of them does is interrupt oil pressure to the fingertips of this engine at exactly the wrong moment. Too early on a cold start, too hard before it's warmed up, cut off too fast after a hard run degraded because it was old or the wrong grade, or poisoned by air that never should have reached it. The phasers don't know which habit did it. They only know pressure, or the absence of it, and the rattle is the only word they have for absence. If you only take one universal action out of this whole video, make it this one. Buy a cheap OBD2 scanner, they run under $30, and actually read the codes if the check engine light comes on, instead of guessing or ignoring it. Codes in the P0016 family point straight at camshaft timing and phasers. P0011 does too. A P030 alongside coolant loss points at the cooling system, not a random misfire. $30 in 5 minutes turns a mystery light into a 5-minute diagnosis. instead of a $500 guess at the shop. And now, the warning I planted back near the start, because this is the single most important thing in this entire video. I told you there are 2 repairs on this list you should never attempt yourself, and here's why. The phaser and timing chain job from item 1, and any real turbo work from item 4, both involve engine timing and oil delivery paths that have to be set exactly right, with the correct tools and the correct torque sequence. Get the timing chain even 1 tooth off on reassembly, and you don't have a rattle anymore. You have bent valves and a truck that doesn't run at all. Install a turbo without properly flushing the feed line, and Garrett's own numbers tell you what happens next. It fails again, often within days, because the same contaminated oil that killed the first one just killed the second. This is why hot shutdown, item 4, is the habit I genuinely call the most dangerous single moment on this entire list. Everything else here is slow, cumulative, forgiving of the occasional slip. Hot shutdown can turn 30 seconds of impatience into a seized turbo before you've even walked into the house. Idle for a minute after towing. That's the whole warnings. None of these 7 things are exotic. You're not being asked to change your oil more than the truck actually needs. Warm it up for 30 seconds. Let it idle after a hard pull. Swap a filter twice a year. And actually read a warning light instead of ignoring it. That's it. That's the entire list standing between a truck that quietly runs past 200,000 miles and one that's in the shop at 80,000 for a repair that never had to happen. Your F-150 was never a bad engine waiting to fail. It's an engine that's been asking, in the one language it has, for 30 seconds of patience a few times a week, and almost nobody's been listening. If this saved you from a repair bill you didn't need to pay, subscribe. There's a lot more like this coming.